Brendan, good morning. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good. Thanks for coming on again, Brendan. Appreciate you
Thanks for
giving me
having
your
me.
time.
Yep.
I think last time we covered a bit of ground, and then it's been such an overwhelming response from the industry. So, and I think since then we've caught up once at the Villawood Sustainability Night in the city. So that was amazing. So how you been?
Yeah, good. Going very well.
Yeah.
Had a nice bike ride this morning, so yeah, good, nice and relaxed.
Yeah, a long way. Where did you go for a bike ride?
Just up the Yarra from Port Melbourne up to sort of around Burnley.
Burnley.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you go often?
A couple of times a week.
Okay.
Yeah.
I actually just
Before
got a
work.
bike.
Did you?
Yeah, it's I don't ride to work just because of my busy schedule and meetings all around Melbourne. But just got a bike, so trying to be a bit more proactive and being a bit more sustainable.
Yeah, it's good. It's interesting. I'm watching my staff. A number of my staff have got electric assist bikes, and now they're riding in for 10 to 20 kilometres each way. So I'm sort of watching electric assist bikes because they're a disruptive, positive technology that will really increase the way that we get on bikes and reduce congestion.
Yeah, okay.
And it's interesting. Infrastructure Australia just came out in support of cycle superhighways for Melbourne yesterday. So I think the cycling space is really going to ramp in the next decade or so. It's good.
I saw you put up a post on LinkedIn the other day. Obviously, we're connected through that platform, and it was in regards to obviously electric bikes. So tell me a bit more about how they work, and how they reduce the negative impact of.
Yeah,
driving.
so they just give you an assist and give you a push. They're huge in places like China, over 100 million of them now. And I think what they do is they just make it easier to travel a larger distance to commute to work.
Okay.
So you arrive, not in a lather of sweat, and it basically pushes out the radius of effective commuting for commuters coming to work and returning. So I have staff who ride in from quite a distance out, like Coburg to Port Melbourne, and with the electric assist bikes, they're getting that push by the battery, the stored energy in the battery, and it just means that they can rock up, not feeling really fatigued. So I think it's a potential. It's a really underestimated technology that could really help alleviate congestion. I watch at the moment that we're spending billions and billions on freeways, but we also have the opportunity to retrofit light engineering, soft engineering approaches like cycle superhighways that will really amplify the amount of cycling that happens and reduce congestion a lot. And it's also got health benefits. It helps tackle the sedentary nature of modern life, where people are carrying too much weight, carrying too much renewable biofuel around the waistline, and we've got health issues. So there's environmental and health and economic and congestion relief benefits from this sort of modal shift to electric bikes. And a lot of European cities are really bike-friendly cities. And unfortunately, the way we've developed our city, it's very sprawling and very car-centric. But we do have opportunities to retrofit, do this soft engineering approach and retrofit, cycle superhighways, and the benefits I think will be huge.
Yeah, I think when we were at that conference the other week, I think Rory Costello, is how I pronounce his name? I think he was the acting CEO at Villawood. I was quite surprised to hear him mention that he has an electric bike and that he rides to work because he just thinks it's so much more effective. I'm guessing you've had a pretty long relationship with Rory and the work you've done over the years.
Yeah, so we've worked with Villawood through my company, Australian Ecosystems, over more than 20 years. We did wetland and drainage planting works for him starting around 2000 at a place called Cypress Rise, and we've done a huge amount of work for Villawood over the years. They've been really good to work with.
So tell us a bit more about Australian Ecosystem. I know last time we sort of mentioned it in the general scheme of what you guys do, but I want to get into a bit more of the technical aspect of things.
Sure.
I think most of our listeners, since last time, would love to hear a bit more about the science background and how it actually works, and how the wetlands actually interact with the shape of the land and what they're designed for.
Sure. So in the 1990s, I was working for councils around Melbourne, working with programs with young offenders coming out of jail, where I was teaching them landscape and replanting rivers and creeks and waterways and collecting seed, and doing this environmental restoration work. And then I saw a study by CSIRO on Port Phillip Bay, where they identified that we needed to pull a lot of stormwater pollution out of Port Phillip Bay, or else the bay would eventually degrade into a very unhealthy state. And they identified a few ways of doing that, and one was building constructed stormwater wetlands. Melbourne Water did a big program called the Healthy Bay Wetlands Program, but they also made a requirement for developers to capture stormwater and retain it in constructed wetlands. And those constructed wetlands capture that drainage, and they slow down that stormwater, and they plant them with mass planting. So there's these big benches of very thick water plants, and the water pushes through those plants, and they act as a filter. And the plants themselves take out pollution out of the water, but they also provide a substrate for beneficial bacteria. And the bacteria is really the engine house that takes nitrogen and phosphorus out of stormwater and metabolizes that and cleans the water. So these constructed wetlands are like big kidneys that filter this stormwater, retain it, drop out the sediment, and clean up the pollution before it's released back to local waterways.
Yes.
And so they do a really, really important job of taking pollution out of waterways, but they're also the beating heart of a lot of these estates. They're this beautiful open space and habitat. They're really important for a lot of birds and frog species that are becoming quite stressed and less common. These constructed urban wetlands, they generally stay full of water even during a drought year, because they're capturing all that runoff from hard surfaces and concentrating that into these water bodies. So the water stays there even in a really dry year, whereas natural wetlands are drying up with climate change and extended droughts. So these urban stormwater wetlands are really important refugia and habitat for plants and animals. They're filtering the water, they're helping with urban cooling, and they're also fantastic interactive spaces for young people who can get out and explore nature. And they're also a really good marketing thing for the development industry. So they've seen these things as a real positive, and often there's premium prices that are attractive for those lots overlooking the water features. Yeah. So it's a sort of a win-win-win, I think.
For everyone involved.
Yeah.
So I think I've done a couple of subjects at university in my master's course, specifically looking at water-sensitive urban design. And one of the most interesting things is that if we come up with a substantial design for a wetland to manage the stormwater runoff properly, there's such a great use for recycled water within Australia. So do you have much involvement with that and how you can use water after it's been treated?
Yeah, so I think, if you've got a natural catchment that's, forested or a grassland, when it rains, 80% of that water is sort of retained in vegetation and soil, and 20% runs off. But when you urbanise a catchment, you put in all those hard surfaces of roads and roofs and footpaths and so on, and it flips. So you get a much greater proportion of water that sheets off into your stormwater infrastructure and then belts into local creeks and can create all this damage. Traditionally, we have engineered our urban form to treat stormwater as a waste stream and to get rid of it as hydrologically efficiently as possible. But we need to think of it as a resource that we need to actually capture and reuse to drought-proof our cities. And there's lots of soft engineering responses, where we can build things like wetlands and also nice vegetated swales on our roadsides that capture that water and hold it up, and then it reinfiltrates back into groundwater. It's used to charge landscapes, and those landscapes then evapotranspire and release water during warm spells, and they help with urban cooling. They also create habitat and a beautiful green environment, and they're part of combating urban heat island effect. In heat waves, urban form can heat much more rapidly than natural landscapes because of all that thermal mass of concrete and bitumen and steel and glass. So the way we dress those landscapes with vegetation is going to be really important in terms of knocking the top off heat waves and keeping communities cooler and safer during hot spells that are increasing now with climate change. So I think we need to be looking at stormwater as a resource, retaining it in the urban form, and building what they call sponge cities, where we build soft engineering responses and use vegetation in clever ways to hold on to and slowly release that water and use it as a resource to charge landscapes.
So yeah, Australian ecosystems. When you guys first go out to a site, how do you go about that process of designing? Like, how would you go about planting? What plants are used in specific areas? What plants are used below or above the Q100, as they say? How do you go about that?
So that's all been worked out by groups like Melbourne Water with input from botanists, including our botanists. So there's actually constructed wetland guidelines that clearly stipulate for the industry how to do this. And there's recently been a revision of those guidelines in the last few years, and they've changed the water depths in some of these wetlands and changed the formats of the plants, and it's working really, really well. So the new wetlands that are following the Melbourne Water guidelines are basically exploding with growth, and they're achieving 80 to 100% plant cover across the treatment zones really, really quickly, generally over one summer growing season. So we just follow the guidelines that Melbourne Water set down, but we've had input into those guidelines.
Yeah.
But sometimes when we get to design our own wetlands, like at the Cape, instead of using the 20 most commonly used wetland filtration species, which are very effective for water treatment, we expanded out and we really improved the habitat value of those wetlands as well. So down at the Cape Sustainable Housing Project near Phillip Island at Cape Patterson, instead of using 20 species, we're using 80 species. So, and we've really thought about international migratory birds and water birds that will use those wetlands, and we've planted them so that there's food and resources for those birds. So they're doing a water treatment function and providing habitat as well.
Wow. So I'm obviously the Cape's your project, and did a little bit of research, and it's quite amazing how you come up with the design and you share all your designs to the entire industry so everyone can be better. In regards to the specifics for the water, how have you integrated, because it's right on the water, and I've noticed that you have a farm on the site. So take us through why you decided to put a farm to reuse water. I noticed that you also have lots of rainwater tanks. All your communities is very, very much around being sustainable, and everyone's bought in. All the people who've bought properties, and obviously you still got many stages to go as well. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah. At the Cape, we've designed an estate that's climate adapted, climate resilient. Houses are all built to operate without the use of fossil fuels. So the houses are all averaging over 8-star energy efficiency. So they use a fraction of the energy of a 6-star house. Then we fit them out with energy efficient all electric fit out. We've replaced the use of gas, which is a really polluting fossil fuel. And in fact, Australia's gas fossil fuel emissions are actually driving up our national emissions now. We're doing a whole lot of stuff across energy efficiency, but gas is becoming a real problem, particularly the big gas projects up in the northwest of Australia. They're actually blowing out Australia's carbon budget. So we've shown how you can have a gas-free estate. So instead of using gas, we use efficient heat pump heating and cooling and hot water systems, and we use high-performance induction cooktops. So that eliminates our requirement to put in gas infrastructure to the estate, gas plumbing, gas appliances, and then we're using these beautiful high-performance energy-efficient appliances, and that eliminates gas bills altogether.
So you've got, I think the minimum requirement for houses in Australia is 6.5 star rating.
6-star at the moment.
6-star rating, excuse me. So to get your house from a 6-star to an 8-star to a 10-star, is there substantial amount of cost involved, or is it just coming up with appropriate designs and people sitting down in a room? How do you guys go about that? And at the Cape, is the cost significantly more than going from a 6-star to an 8-star or an 8-star to a 10-star? Through that.
The cost can be higher if you don't have well-trained builders and if you don't get your design right, but we've eliminated most of that premium by having a big training process with our builders where we pulled in some of Australia's leading energy efficiency experts and really good sustainable designers. So a really good knowledge base, and we did this sort of collaborative learning process together, and at the end result was 10 open source house designs. And because they kept being reviewed by the energy efficiency experts and everyone together, every time they were recosted, we saw the prices come down. So by configuring your lots so they've got nice passive solar access, and then training your builders and having input from energy efficiency experts, you can reduce the premium to build down to less than 5%, to take it from a 6-star to an 8-star zero carbon house. And then you've got a house like all the houses at the Cape. RMIT just did a study, and they found that the houses are averaging bills of maybe $500 a year. Some are zeroing their energy bills. They're because they've all got solar, they're averaging 4 to 5 kilowatts of solar. They've got efficient all-electric fit-out, and they're 8-star. The houses are using very little energy. They're actually using 88% less grid energy than a conventional 6-star gas electric estate in Melbourne. So that's a huge step down, and they're also generating 3 to 4 times as much energy as they're using. So, and they're getting paid for that, like they're getting feed-in tariffs. So a lot of people are zeroing their energy bills. And then you've got the health benefits. So during heat waves, the houses at the Cape are sitting between 18 to 25 degrees with minimal to no heating and cooling, whereas a lot of our urban form is actually really heating up. So heat waves are becoming a real Achilles heel for the housing industry. Our heat wave scientists, experts are saying that we're going to be hitting 50-degree days in coming decades in major capital cities, and people might sort of think, well, that's a far stretch, but we hit 48.9 degrees in Penrith in Western Sydney this summer. It's not far away from 50 degrees.
That's bloody hot. That is very warm.
And if you look at the way we're building our urban form, we're building a lot of black tiled roofs, blacktop roads, a lot of thermal mass, not enough vegetation, and the houses are hot boxes. They don't have sufficient shade structures to stop the houses taking in that heat, or the ability to shed that heat, and they need a lot of energy, a lot of air conditioning to actually keep them cool and livable.
So, but I think when we caught up last time, there's a specific design where the orientation of the house, where depending if it's facing north or south, wherever it's facing, that it obviously incorporates a lot more heat and it's able to stay cooler depending on the orientation. Can you explain a little bit more for our listeners?
Yeah, so it's just using the laws of physics and good design. So at the Cape, the houses are built so they've got good northern orientation with the design of the glazing, so that it allows that winter sun to come into the living areas where it makes contact with thermal mass, like polished concrete floors, reverse brick veneer walls. That warms up during the day in winter, and then overnight that warmth re-releases and it's held within the building envelope by nice insulation. So the houses stay beautiful and warm in winter, including overnight. And then in summer, when the sun's higher up in the sky, we have shade structures that block that hot summer sun coming into the living areas. So it sort of flips in a reverse. It becomes a cool store.
Oh, wow. I think you build your own bricks on site as well as an option, correct?
Most of the houses, 99% of it is just conventional building materials that the industry can follow. We're not doing any sort of, anything that's super edgy or experimental. Everything is on millions of houses around the world, but just put in the right place. Like our energy efficiency experts said to us, it costs just as much to put a window in the wrong spot as the right spot from an energy performance point of view. We are doing a few interesting things. So we've got pressed earth blockworks that we make on site with our brick press with local granitic sand. So it's a really low carbon form of thermal mass. But that's just a handful. That's a few of the houses, but most of them are just using conventional materials, so the rest of the industry can follow what we're doing.
Yeah.
So the houses, they perform beautifully and have that effortless comfort. They keep warm in winter, cool in summer, with minimal heating and cooling. If we had a blackout in the grid, the houses the people at the Cape would be quite okay. And then if they do need to do a bit of heating and cooling, they're using Dakin 7-star split systems that run on the smell of an oily rag without the oil. They're really super energy efficient, and then they're all producing a big surplus of clean energy with the solar as well. So they're energy positive, carbon neutral houses.
I find it really interesting because the science behind it's so technical, but when you explain it so well, it's so simple that I think a lot of the issues within the industry, especially in the construction industry, is that it's just too hard to be sustainable. It's such an ignorant way to be, and they talk about the cost of being sustainable. It outweighs obviously the cost of being able to build your own house, and the affordability aspect is such an important thing. Can you talk me through the pricing structure at the Cape? Because as I said, a lot of people have sort of reached out to me wanting to know a bit more about the cost of the Cape and being able to live down there.
So with the Cape, we've done that optimal process of training our builders so that they now, and that's the other thing, once they've done 30 or 40 houses, they get really good and really fast at doing those little extra things to seal up building envelopes and make sure that they're high performance. So it's just, if a builder goes and tries to build one high performance house, it's going to cost more. But once they've done 30, they get very good at it and very quick, and it just becomes second nature. Practice makes perfect. So at the Cape, we've got country builders who are building 30 to 40 homes a year, and they've managed to get the premium from going from a 6-star to an 8-star house, an 8-star efficient all-electric zero-carbon house, down to less than 5%. And the beauty of that is that it keeps the house beautiful and comfortable in extremes of weather. When we're going to get more of those with climate change, it reduces the energy bills, eliminates carbon emissions. So a lot of the houses have $500 bills or less, and some of them are now plugging in electric cars and charging that on surplus solar as well. So they're eliminating their petrol bills.
You power the site next door. So from my understanding, what I've read on the website and through small conversations with people, that you actually can power the surrounding towns next to you. Is that correct?
Yeah, so this is the whole estate and the houses are generating 3 to 4 times as much energy as they're actually using, and they're exporting the rest of it to the grid. So it's powering up the existing township, the old township next door, that's got legacy houses that are pretty energy intensive and not particularly well built from a climate change and energy point of view. So the Cape is now acting like a clean energy power station. And I think nationally, housing is generating 10 to 12% of Australia's carbon footprint. And then there's another 10% coming from commuter vehicles. And at the Cape, we're showing how you can eliminate both of those. That's 22% of Australia's carbon emissions. It's interesting, you see these high-profile targets by environmentalists like, the big coal mines that are proposed up in Queensland, but housing is a massive part of Australia's carbon footprint. And now with good design and these new really efficient technologies that you can fit these houses out that have come down in cost so much over the last 10 years, you can build houses that decouple people from carbon emissions and decouple them from energy bills, and now decouple them from petrol bills. And this is significant. So we've got one house at the Cape where they've got, I had a chat to him and he's powered his long-range electric vehicle and his house over the last year, and his energy and petrol bill for the last 6 months was $6. So it's like a $5,000 a year saving, tax-free, that stays in the pockets of those residents. And this is a big opportunity for volume builders and the development industry to unlock that potential for residents.
And that's the one thing I keep saying to people. The financial benefits are great, but I'm so focused with the health benefits that they clearly outweigh the financial benefits. But I think more people are so focused on the financial benefits that they don't see those health benefits are going to benefit them, their children, their great-grandchildren for generations to come. And how do we sort of break down that barrier? Because I was thinking we should just do a day out in the Cape where you take, I don't know, like a bus tour of 500 people who are interested. And I think we could organise that somehow just to show everyone how advanced the Cape is compared to the rest of the industry at the moment.
So we have National Sustainable House Day, which is this national event organised by a not-for-profit group called Renew. And they have tens of thousands of people nationally where people who have sustainable high-performance homes open up those homes, and people can come and talk to the owners and the builders and so on. We have a big day every September on that day at the Cape, and last year we had 2,000 people on site.
Wow. That's exactly what I'm talking about. I'd love to come.
So that's a really good day where we have 5, 6 or 8 houses open, and you can come in and you can talk to the builders and the residents and meet the teams and understand how these houses come together, look at the technologies, download the free plans, all that sort of stuff. So the Cape's really trying to get the whole housing industry just to step up and unlock some of this great economic and health and environmental potential for Australia. Yep.
I think when I stop and actually think about what I'm doing and how I want to make an impact, and obviously the smaller builders within Victoria, at the end of the day, they're mum and dads, they've got families, they're trying their best. The responsibility sits on the shoulders of the volume housing builders. I think they're the ones that really need to pull their finger out, as they say, and get on board, because in order to make it, from a financial point of view, more affordable, you have to mass produce. And those volume housing contractors and builders, I don't know if they're doing enough. What's your thoughts on?
So I think at the Cape, we've got small regional builders who are building small numbers, and they've managed to get that premium down, and they're hitting numbers of $2,200 a square metre. The volume builders can actually, by virtue of the fact that they're building with such economy of scale and they've got such purchasing power, they can use their efficiencies and they can achieve similar small premiums in their market to deliver high performance housing. So if they just follow that sort of same process of training up their design teams and training their builders and their trades and bringing everyone along for the ride, then they can unlock this sort of potential. And it is super marketable. Like if you've got a house there that's costing you $5,000 a year more than the one next to it, and the one next to it is beautiful and comfortable during a heat wave, whereas the poorly built one has people sort of gasping for breath because there's been a blackout and there's no energy and they can't turn on their air conditioner during a heat wave. I mean, like they're very marketable concepts for marketers to market in the positive in favour of super low energy and low bill, low running cost, healthier houses. So marketers need to jump on this. I think it's going to define the future of our industry, and progressive volume builders will be looking very hard at this to try and step up, I think.
Step up. And that's, I think, once they see the benefits from a financial point of view, like everyone, they run companies and sometimes it does come down to dollars and cents. But once they see the health benefits and how they can take our industry to the next level, I think they will start to jump on board. But like everyone doesn't want to be the first, but they want to jump on that bandwagon.
Look, it needs to be everyone. It needs to be consumers developing a greater level of sophistication when they're purchasing the house to look at the health and the running costs of that house. I mean, it's equivalent to buying a car that looks good, but it gives you 3 kilometres to the to the litre, and it's got this massive cost. And in terms of safety, it doesn't have airbags and seatbelts that will protect you in an extreme event. Like in the case of housing, it's going to be these big super heat waves. So we've got to build safer housing that's got these lower running costs, that's more comfortable and healthy, and that is a super marketable thing. So I think progressive volume. Hopefully, we're going to see an uplift with progressive volume builders getting on board, but also leadership from the development industry, the big developers, the big progressive developers. So at the moment, you've got value-driven smaller developers like the Cape, projects like there was a great project called Beyond Today in South Australia, which was very financially, it was a financially successful project well before its time. Lockyer Park in South Australia. And also there's a Mullen Creek project. There's Salt in Torquay, which is being done by Barwon Water. They've gone gas-free, and they're sort of mimicking the minimum standards of the Cape. I know Villawood is stepping right up with projects like Aquarevo. So what we need now is, I think water authorities who are developing surplus land, probably the next logical step to try and get 1,000 lotter that just steps up to 7.5 star gas-free, efficient all electric solar, and then creates an estate that's climate adapted, that's a power station that's powering nearby suburbs, that's freeing their people from energy bills and also looking at the electric vehicle stuff as well. I think if we get a few thousand lotters, the water authorities, they've got to hit a financial return, but also a social and an environmental return. They're sort of triple bottom line in their assessments.
So the water authorities are probably the biggest ones at the moment to get on board, do you think?
If I'm looking at how we can scale better carbon neutral, high performance housing, I think you've got your volume driven developers doing it now. Next thing will be your water authorities stepping up, like your Aquarevos with Southeast Water and your Barwon Waters, Melbourne Water, those sort of groups. And then you've got your progressive developers who are talking to their volume builders saying, let's step up, let's do some training, let's lift the bar. And then the other thing that's happening is there's currently a review of the national building code, and there's a good push to try and get us up to 7-star and that's across the board. And that will be a massive step like that. That'll save tens of billions of dollars in avoided energy bills for householders over coming decades, and that's something that really needs to be supported.
Are they consulting you on that?
Look, the cape's being used as a case study, along with other good energy efficient projects around the country. So that's one that everyone needs to get behind. And then, like there was pushback when we went to 5-star, then there was sort of pushback when we went to 6-star, and then everyone just recalibrates and trains and does it. And then no doubt there'll be some pushback on 7-star, but it's just the health and environmental economic benefits are just massive for Australia to do it.
Yeah. How far is the Cape away from, let's say, Melbourne, if you were to drive? Because I'd love to live there. Like, I think I explained that to you a couple of times, that I would easily live there. For me, I work in the city, so trying to get to work in the morning would be quite tricky. Is there much public service?
Probably too far to commute on a daily basis to Melbourne, but what we are seeing is we're getting e-changers who are, because we've got NBN and broadband and fibre optics to the home, we've got high-speed broadband, and we're seeing clever
home
consultants, a sort of a clever class of architects and designers and consultants, creatives who are escaping the overheated property market here in the city and moving to the Cape, and then they're sort of doing a trip once a week to see their clients in Melbourne. And so we've got this sort of e-changer. You've heard of sea change and tree change. Well, there's e-change, which is lifestyle towns that have got that connectivity with high-speed broadband and even video conferencing, so it allows them to work remote and then drop in and out of the big city to see their clients and enjoy that lifestyle. So we're about an hour and 3/4 from Melbourne down to the Cape. It's the same distance as Cowes from the CBD.
Okay. So I guess comes to my next question. When are we going to get the Cape 30, 40 minutes from Melbourne?
Yeah, well, look, I think we won't be too far away from seeing some developers doing some step-up projects that pretty much pull all of the learnings from the Cape and embed it in a urban project. Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting because I was just thinking, like, where would I, if I could live anywhere, where would I want to live? And I'm thinking like that 30-minute commute from the city. It's not that far.
On your electric bike.
An electric bike. Definitely. Or a Tesla. Elon Musk, if you're listening.
Yeah. And one of the other interesting things we're doing at the Cape, which you mentioned, is the urban farm. So we've built, we're at the Cape, we're using rainwater and stormwater as a resource. So all the houses have 10,000 litre rainwater storage tanks plumbed back into the toilet flushing and garden and so on. And then we have a rainwater harvesting scheme where 20 homes in stage 1 feed a big gravity pipe that goes down to our big community farm. We've got a 230,000 litre water tank there that captures that rainwater, and our engineers reckon we're going to get about 3 million litres of water a year out of that rainwater harvesting into our urban farm. And we've built the first stage of the farm, and it's advanced wicking beds, so they're self-watering, bottom-watering wicking beds. They're really water efficient and low maintenance, and it's been going for 4 years now, and it's just every year it powers out a huge amount of tomatoes and fresh produce. And because it holds enough water for a week during the hot spells, it means that you can go down on the weekend and just harvest and replant, and you're not wedded to your garden every day to water it during a heat wave.
Yep. It retains that water in the system already, so it's great.
It is, and we're building a much bigger farm, hopefully this year, that'll have propagation facilities, a little nursery, meeting spaces, and just an orchard, poultry, beekeeping, a whole lot of stuff. So we think that we'll be generating around, we've had professional food growers model how much food we will get out of the farm, and they think it's more than 150 grand per annum at supermarket prices. So again, farmers, there's enough space for 100 farmers. 100 farmers pulling at least $1,500 a year of produce. Again, that drops their bills again. So it also builds food security, and it allows us to capture our waste stream organics. Instead of sending them to landfill, we can compost them and put them back into food production. So you can get this nice circular economy thing happening where you're spinning a whole lot of food out of the urban form. we've developed these pop-up self-watering farms. We're mass producing them in Melbourne now, in southeast Melbourne through Biofilter, which is another one of the companies I'm involved in.
Tell us a bit more about Biofilter. I think we spoke last time, but obviously listeners didn't get an in-depth understanding of what Biofilter do.
So Biofilter is we started by designing really interesting stormwater harvesting systems that you could drop into existing urban form and building these. So we've got a series of our systems ring fencing the city of Melbourne. So what we do is we intercept underground stormwater pipes and we capture that flow, which traditionally would have just belted straight into the Yarra River, picking up a whole lot of pollutants and sheeting it into the river. We divert that through a big gross pollutant trap that spins out all the rubbish and a lot of the sediment, and then it goes into big underground water tanks, and then we pump it through planted filters and then capture that clean water again, and then pump it up into our city parks. So we've got these at Birrarung Ma and a range of places around Melbourne.
So the GPT, that's just for everyone to know.
Gross pollutant trap?
Yeah.
Yep.
So basically the water goes into the gross pollutant trap. The water obviously has pollutants, rubbish, bags, sediments, and take us through that process. I understand it well because I've designed things.
Yep. So basically, we've got these sort of spinning. They're like giant
washing machines.
Yeah, washing machines or stainless steel trash cans underground that filter out all of the large pollutants, and then basically you can just get a truck and lift that out and empty it every 6 months or every year. And that captures all those gross pollutants, and then the water gets through that. We have a little hydrocarbon chamber that floats off oils, and then the water goes into a big primary tank, and then it sits, and from there your pollutants that are still remaining are things like nitrogen and phosphorus, some heavy metals in the fine suspended sediment. We then pump that through a planted filter, and that takes out those pollutants, and then it gets stored into a demand tank, and then it gets zapped. So we zap bacteria with a UV mechanism, and then we pump it back up into the parks. So we're just capturing all those rain events and then pumping it back up into the parks, often during winter. Because with climate change, we've seen a drop off of our autumn and winter rain, and that's causing a decline of a lot of our big trees in Melbourne. So what they're trying to do is pump that water out and get the subsoil reservoir charged with lots of water during those autumn and winter months, so that those plants have got plenty of water during the hot spells. So we've perfected those underground stormwater harvesting systems, and when you walk over and you don't even know you're standing on top of a big 5 million litre water tank or whatever, and all you see is this nice planted filter, and we've got cafes sitting right next to them, and people think, oh, those little fountain bubblers have just activated. I wonder what that's about. Well, it's actually filtering all the water slowly, and then capturing it and getting ready to pump it back out into the parks. So they're clever retrofitting of soft engineering approaches for urban sustainability. We then thought, okay, we know how to replumb cities to capture stormwater and drought-proof them. Let's look at how we can grow food in cities. So we started developing these advanced wicking beds, these self-watering farms that were really low maintenance, water efficient, really productive, that could receive composted organics that were low tech, so that you don't need a lab coat to run the thing, And then we went into mass production. We dropped about the best part of $1 million on tooling, so that we can just pump these high performance, well engineered wicking beds out, and we're making them in southeast Melbourne. And now we're building pop-up farms everywhere now. So backyards, rooftops, schools, community farms.
I think you're building a rooftop farm in the city. Is that correct?
Yeah. So
tell us more about that, because once again, I've only read a bit about it. I haven't visited a site, but it's apparently amazing. So
So Melbourne Sky Farm, we looked for an opportunity to build a big demonstration farm in the city that shows how you can intercept abundant waste stream organics and abundant rainwater in a city environment and divert that into food production.
Can you tell us where that's located before?
So it's opposite the Melbourne Convention Exhibition Centre. It's in Seafarers Precinct, which is on the North Wharf, opposite South Wharf. So it's just downstream from the casino and opposite the Melbourne Convention Centre. There's Seafarers Bridge. That sort of, you walk across that and you're at the base of the car park. It's a big car park right on Wurundjeri Way, next to the Seafarers. What's it called? The Seafarers Centre there.
Is that okay? I'm not sure. I think I generally know the area, but I'm trying to actually picture it exactly.
Next to there's a Melbourne big police station there, so we're right near that. So that's a project where we're going to build that out this year with a big pop-up farm that'll literally take us a couple of weeks to build with our new modular system.
And then, also an abandoned car park, is that correct?
It's a working car park, but the top floor was not being used, so it's an underutilised space in the city.
And cars parking issues in Melbourne are in existence. Like I can barely find a car park some days, and the cost of car park is ridiculous. Knowing that there's a car park that's up there that's not getting used and is creating significant issues like in Melbourne. So I think it contributes to the heat factor of Melbourne, correct?
Yeah, so big concrete slabs like car parks heat up during heat waves and then re-radiate that heat, and they're part of that urban heat island problem that we have. It's a working car park. They just that top level was cordoned off. There was some economic reasons why that was done, so there's some rational reasons why that was done.
Okay.
But it created this great opportunity for us to just build out what I call food growing architecture that intercepts those abundant waste streams in the city and turns the city into an abundant food growing space. If you look at cities, they're massively consuming structures that chew up a lot of natural resources and create a lot of waste streams. But if we re-engineer those waste streams, we can turn cities into really productive biological pumps that can create a whole lot of value, including food. And that's what Melbourne Sky Farm is about. So we're going to transform that into a beautiful working farm with urban biodiversity, beekeeping, a lot of plants that are habitat for the animals that live in the city. We'll have a cafe and a conference space, a nursery, and there'll be an education space. So we'll get thousands of school kids up there, and they'll be learning about how to retrofit our urban form using those soft engineering, sustainable approaches, so that we're climate adapted and resilient and more livable.
So will people be able to farm there? Like, for example, like if I wanted to buy a little space to do my little gardening patch, can I do that?
So it's open to the public, and we're partnering with food charities, and so it'll be professionally run and spinning out a couple of tonne of food a year for food charities, and we'll be activating a little Friends of the Farm group. But it's not a farm where you got individual plots, but it'll be run by horticulturalists with some volunteers, and we'll be generating a surplus of food for food charities.
Okay, and Australian Ecosystem, your other business, will be supplying all the plants for that, I'm guessing?
To start with, but there'll be a little nursery out there that grows a lot of seedlings for Sky Farm as well.
So tell me a bit more about the cafe that's going to be there, because obviously with the natural produce is produced there, will that cafe be using that?
Yeah, so we'll be self-consuming some of that produce. The majority of it will be going to a food charity. But there'll be a nice gin bar up there. So I'll be generating some really interesting botanicals. So it'll be a very diverse, floristically diverse palette of plants up there with a lot of interesting botanicals that we'll infuse into our gin and all that sort of stuff. We're going to be profiling farms around Victoria and Australia that are really stepping up on sustainability. So regenerative farming enterprises that are sinking carbon in soil and recreating wildlife and habitat corridors. So we're going to be picking a series of sort of iconic farms that we work with, and we'll be pulling their produce into the menu as well. So it's not only what's happening on the farm, we'll be linking to the really inspirational sustainability projects, renewable energy projects, urban agriculture, habitat restoration, all these sort of things happening around Australia.
Okay. With the farm being built, how does it reduce, obviously, I think you mentioned before, the heat that it radiates off the concrete. So how will the farm being there reduce that impact, the adverse impact that it has on, obviously, the climate?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We're going to be setting up a whole lot of sensors on Sky Farm, and then sensors on a similar concrete slab somewhere else in the city, and we'll be tracking actual temperature during hot spells and heat waves. But at the moment, that is just it's a big concrete slab, and when you hit a 40-degree day, the incoming radiation from the sun is absorbed into thermal mass. So it's absorbed by concrete and steel rebar and so on. And that holds that heat. It's a heat bank, you know. It's like you've walked on a hot concrete.
It releases it at night, doesn't it?
And then it re-releases that at night. So when we cover it up with our farm, instead of hot concrete, you're going to be having a whole lot of cool green plants. You know, be like more like a mossy forest. And those plants will be sitting in water, in fully hydrated in this farm that self-waters. And as those plants warm up, their heat response is to evapotranspire and release water through the plant tissue, and then as water evaporates off, that cools the plants and it therefore cools the environment. So you'll see a big differential in the actual temperature between that rooftop before and after.
The plant and obviously the concrete rooftop.
It's like, you know, if you walk through a hot city environment, then all of a sudden you walk under a beautiful big tree. There's just an instant drop in temperature.
Yeah, you automatically feel, and I guess that's why when on hot days we go to sit underneath a tree to feel more cooler and just a bit more calmer.
Yep.
It's so interesting because I think I was looking at a few projects around, and I'm just looking at, people don't realise, although Melbourne has a lot of high-rise buildings, I think I was sitting on top of this massive high-rise and I was looking out. There is a lot of greenery within an open space within Melbourne, and it's so interesting to think that we probably don't utilise a lot of the space as well that we do have in Melbourne enough.
Yeah.
So I want to know, like, part of this farm, are we able to replicate this in other areas, and how would we go about doing that?
Yeah, so urban farming and rooftop farming is big internationally, and Australia needs to now catch up. Same as in energy efficient housing. Like, we're now behind places like Europe, where they actually do what we're doing at the Cape. That's just done. It's just an accepted standard in the industry.
There was a sustainability conference like 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago in Melbourne. I think you spoke of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the interesting thing is, in the Northern Hemisphere, buildings are built with rooftops that are load bearing to take snowpack, the weight of snow. Whereas here we build more lightweight rooftops that aren't load bearing. So that's a bit of a problem, and we need to see all rooftops as an opportunity. So all new buildings should have a bit of load bearing capacity, so that you can actually build urban greenery and use that rooftop space and turn it from being a hot concrete space, for instance, into being a usable, very valuable space for the public and for residents. So we need to be looking at the guidelines and the regulations and requiring any new development to actually have a rooftop space that can be turned into a rooftop park or garden or farm. That's the big change that needs to happen. We now have the modular systems where we can build out these farms in a matter of days. You know, they can be built. They can click together and you can build the thing really quickly. And you don't need to, with our system, you don't need to tank the roof. A lot of urban farms, a lot of rooftop farms in the US, they put down a membrane and then soil, and I think that's sort of high risk that someone will puncture that with a pitchfork or a shovel. With our system, it's tanked and it sits up off the roof, so you don't need to waterproof the roof. So that's a big advantage.
Hey, I've got a question. I'm going back to the Cape. At the conference that I heard you speak at, and your builder was there, sorry, I can't remember his name, but he mentioned a wind blow test that you do on the front of your door that's mandatory for all your houses that you build, and how that can have such a positive impact in reducing the amount of energy that's wasted through our homes and the heat that's required to obviously keep the homes at a temperature. Talk us through a bit of that just the general mums and dads that are listening can actually get tested on their house to make it more efficient.
So in Australia, we've built historically pretty leaky homes over history. Often that's been, it's actually been a functional thing because we've had, in the old days, wood-fired stoves, and we needed the houses to actually breathe and to be able to release, breathe a little. But it's really important to have, for energy efficiency, to have a house that's reasonably airtight, because any gaps, you're just seeing dollars go out those gaps. You're losing your heat during winter and you're gaining heat during summer. And as a result, you've got to spend a lot more energy and expense in heating and cooling the homes. So our builders at the Cape, we're designing 8-star homes, and then they validate that they are 8-star by doing what's called a blower door test.
Yes, that's what it's called.
So they get an independent group. We use Bor Sustainability Group, who come in and they tape up the doors and they seal a door, and then they put a computer-controlled fan, and that fan then pulls air through a vent out of the home. So it's sort of not pushing air into the house. It's actually pulling air through that door. And what that does is it then pulls air through any gaps in doors or windows or insulation or unsealed penetrations, gets pulled into the house cavity and expelled through the door. And they can measure how airtight that house is with this computer-controlled system. So at a certain fan pressure, we're achieving air exchanges of 5 per hour, whereas a lot of houses in Australia are 20 per hour, 25 per hour, 30 per hour using that test. And then what that does is it just validates that the builder has done a really good job of sealing up everything. The house. Yeah. You don't want to drop below 5 because you start to get a house that doesn't breathe enough, and you can get mold issues, or you have to put in a mechanical ventilation system like they do with passive houses. There's a standard of house called Passive House from Germany, and they're super airtight down to less than 1 air exchange an hour, but then they mechanically ventilate. But with the ones at the Cape, 5 air exchanges an hour is a really good number, and it just means that you're not losing warmth during winter, and you're not gaining heat during summer, and the house is really nicely sealed.
So where's generally speaking, if you're a homeowner, where's the worst place that reduces, obviously that releases that air? I think I remember the builder saying not just windows, there's some of the random places that you can walk past that will reduce the air.
Yeah, so
release air, sorry.
And it's interesting, the builders have got thermal cameras and they can look through walls. So, at the Cape, TS Constructions walk around with a thermal camera and they just do a check and they can see through plaster and see if one of the trades didn't seal up a penetration, and then they'll say, all right, pull the plaster off and reseal that, and the bill goes to the plumber or the electrician. And
electricians, I think I remember it. It's electricians, is that right? Around the switches now, I remember. Is it consistently that there's always air being released through there just because it's not tight and sealed up properly?
Yeah. So what TS Constructions do is they bring all the trades along. When they do an air pressure test, they bring in the plumbers and the electricians and the plasterers and everyone. And they can see precisely where the air leakages are, and they learn. So now they don't have these issues because they've just trained and brought their trades along for the ride. So you get air leakage around doors, around windows, downlights through plumbing and electrical penetrations through walls, and it's a little bit of a problem with the process in volume build homes, where you'll have separate teams coming in and doing those things, and you'll have your insulation put in, and then there'll be a heap of penetrations done by electricians and plumbers, and they're not then resealed before the plaster is in, on the back of them, just sealing everything up.
Yeah, coordination point of view.
So it needs good project management and training of those trades to seal things up. But you also can now look through walls with thermal cameras.
I saw the thermal cameras. Amazing to see where the issues where there's too much heat and then where there's a lack of heat, obviously being able to be held for the house. And I think that's brilliant.
I think that's going to be a bit of a thing where there's going to need to be a little bit of a process change for volume builders who sometimes have those disparate groups coming in and doing their particular part of a build.
Yeah, and then pissing off.
Unsupervised.
Yeah.
So that'll be a bit of a challenge that needs some good thinking, and it might be some elements are sort of prefabbed in a controlled environment, so you just don't get those issues. But then it's just training your trades, and if they penetrate, they must then reseal it, and it just becomes the thing that you do. Yep.
So before I forgot to get you a coffee, I noticed that you have a coffee company. Is that correct? Yeah. I was like rushing up. By the way, guys, there's a coffee store next door, and I normally get a coffee from me and Brendan. And I actually forgot to get him a coffee today because I was running a little bit late to my own interview with Brendan. How bad's that? Tell me a bit about the coffee company that you have.
So we have a coffee company called Cirrus Fine Coffee in Port Melbourne. At our offices and upstairs, we've got our hub where we have our staff from Australian Ecosystems in the Cape and Biofilter and Melbourne Sky Farm working. And downstairs is a nice coffee roastery. We have a nice pop-up farm out the front where we're composting coffee grounds and coffee chaff and the organics coming out of the staff kitchen, and we grow a whole lot of food in this nice little pop-up farm. And the coffee company, we're purchasing coffee from cooperatives around the world. So it's ethically sourced beans where the growers set their price, and we've worked really hard on eliminating waste out of the coffee. So all the coffee bags have a bioplastic, plant-based plastic liners. And we collect those back from our clients, and then we hot compost them, with a commercial composter, so they turn back into soil, and they go out onto farms. And we also just work really hard on waste elimination within the company. Yeah.
The reason being is that obviously most offices have coffee machines within their company. I know myself, I make 3 to 4 coffees a day. And can't function without it some days. And I was just thinking, like, the used coffee grains, I guess, once you've pressed them, grounds, and once you've pressed them, what do you guys do with them?
So we did a bit of research on coffee grounds in Australia, and we found that there's enough coffee grounds to fill I think it's about 100 Olympic swimming pools per annum. It's a significant resource that's currently mostly going to waste and probably ended up in landfill, where it's breaking down anaerobically and creating methane gas, which is a powerful global warming gas. But it's a massive resource that could be diverted to urban farming. And we partner with a group called Reground, which is a really great little sort of social enterprise in Melbourne, and they run around all our cafes and pick up those coffee grounds, and then they send them to urban community gardens around Melbourne, and they're composted and used to produce food. Coffee grounds they're full of minerals and nutrient. You must compost it. If you just throw it on your soil, it can inhibit plant growth. It's got something called phytoinhibitors in it. It needs to be broken down in a composting process, and then it breaks it right down and turns it into nice plant food. So hot composting is important, and we would suggest that you use maybe 10 to 15% by volume of coffee grounds into your soil compared to the other inputs, and then that's a really nice balanced compost for urban farming.
That's interesting because obviously I love coffee, but you don't think about what happens after. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I want to make sure that like all our offices that's like one little step that we can make to be.
And I would also just suggest steer away from coffee pods. They're a single-use waste stream, and it's interesting with waste generation. I sort of compare it to eliminating safety hazards in the workplace. So when you're working on safety, and the industry understands that really well. Well, the best approach is to actually engineer out the hazard in the first place, and then you've got this sort of hierarchy of management. And the last line defense is putting on PPE. If you can't eliminate that hazard, you put on protective glasses and goggles and face masks, that sort of stuff. To me, recycling is like putting on PPE. You can actually design the waste stream out of the process in the first place. And in coffee, that's not using pods. That's actually just avoiding using pods. It's not using takeaway cups. It's using reusable cups, and there's a whole lot of really, really good quality reusable cups on the market. So there's a whole lot of things we can do to actually eliminate waste streams so that we don't have this overload of material that we need to then recycle, and we're not recycling it. We have this big crisis where we were sending all that to China, and now they're not receiving it anymore. So then we've got these big stockpiles of plastic that are capturing, and creating fire hazards in our suburbs, like that big Coolaroo fire north of Melbourne. Whereas just through a bit of extra thought, we can actually go zero waste by shopping at zero waste, supermarkets and so on. And they're starting to pop up around the world. And there's, good chain stores now, bulk source food or source bulk food. They're really, really good.
I think I've heard of them.
Yeah. Well, I go to those places now with my jars, and you just fill up everything, and you can get everything from washing detergent and powders and all sorts of food in bulk, and you completely eliminate the waste stream. So that's where we've got to get to, is just sort of stop generating the single-use plastics.
Where's that located, Brendan? Because
Source Bulk Foods, they're a franchise. They're all over Australia, so there's lots of them now. Yeah.
Okay. So
and I reckon they do it really well. They sort of nailed it. Really good presentation and a really wide range of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. So, where can everyone get in contact with you, like at the moment? So I know through the Cape you've got your contact details on there, but if someone wanted to get in contact with you with any of the projects that you're doing at the moment, where would be the best place?
Well, the best way to get information about the projects is just visit the website. So Australian Ecosystems does the big biodiversity and wetland landscaping projects. We've got a residential division now called the Sustainable Landscape Company. So you hit that website if you wanted to do a residential landscape with biodiversity and food and urban cooling and so on. Biofilter, if you're interested in an urban farm of any size. The Cape, if you want information on that, and there's all sorts of designs, but also for developers, the design guidelines are pretty much a blueprint of how to build a zero-emission, climate-resilient, low-running cost estate. So just download them; it's all there. And if you want a good coffee while you're reading all that, just hit the website, Cirrus Fine Coffee.
Awesome. Brendan, thank you so much for coming on board, mate. I loved having you on again. And as I said, I'll keep having you on the podcast and keep spreading all the amazing work that you're doing throughout this community and around Australia and the world. And I think I made a joke before that you're the Elon Musk of ecology and sustainability within Australia, and you're leading the way. And I just applaud you. The amount of energy that you put in is amazing, and I want to keep supporting you to do that. Well,
I think in Australia we've got big challenges in terms of water and food security and climate change, and we've just seen that express itself with the big super drought and bushfires that we've just experienced. The natural world's under a lot of stress, cities are under stress, but if we can flip the narrative and see that crisis as an opportunity, and if we put our thinking caps on, we can spin out so many benefits and commercial opportunities, and we really need to get moving. And innovators working in companies and also at the level of local government can really turbocharge and grab a hold of those opportunities in future.
Awesome. Thank you very much for coming on board, Brendan.
Thank you.